Hi everyone, it's Emily, and today I'm finally sitting down and talking about all the games I've played so far in 2023. I'm certainly not the fastest when it comes to completing games, but I'm really pleased with all the games I was able to get to this first quarter of the year. So the first game I want to talk about that came out at the start of the year is Fire Emblem Engage. So this is one of my most anticipated releases of the year, and I even got the special edition for this that I did an unboxing and first impressions video for. So I'm not sure how much I can add to the conversation that hasn't already been said about this game, but I'm really pleased with the return to form of the Fire Emblem franchise. And I thought they did a pretty decent job at balancing some of the elements that were introduced in Three Houses games with many of the social sort of aspects with the more traditional combat from the older games of the franchise. Now, the story is the biggest weakness in Fire Emblem Engage, so I can see why a lot of Three Houses fans were disappointed by this title, especially with the lack of the really deep connection of the social elements. However, I feel like when it comes to the Fire Emblem franchise, I do prioritize the combat and characters kind of over their attempts at the lore and story. So them stepping away from the heavy story elements was okay with me in this title, especially because this title was meant to be more of an anniversary celebration of the entire franchise, which is why they brought back so many iconic characters. So I think the emphasis on the characters and the traditional combat was really the right direction to go with Engage. But yeah, I spent a good portion of my time just playing the different battles and the skirmishes, just to build up my character stats and play around with the different Engage rings to build up a lot of those unique character skills. It did take me a hot second to realize that whenever you level up the main character earlier, it does also bump up the level of all the skirmishes. So that was a little bit of a learning curve I had to do in the beginning. But once I got past that, it was a lot of fun just to enter any of the skirmish battles at any time and not kind of be restricted to adhering to the main storyline, to be able to enter the combat. And character-wise, I did enjoy a lot of the new characters they introduced. It was also nice to see the return of many of the classic heroes, though their interactions with the new cast was rather limited, unfortunately. But I did feel like they added way too many characters. And towards the end of the game, I just had to focus on my main party and neglect a lot of the other characters in order to just advance the storyline. I could see why they introduced so many characters, just to give you some allowance in case some of them died if you're on classic mode, but I was painstakingly trying to level up all my characters slowly during the skirmishes and took advantage of the rewinding time mechanic. So I was a little overwhelmed with the amount of characters you had at your disposal. And I did find some of the characters more interesting than others. I think a lot of the earlier characters were a little less interesting, so I didn't really develop their skill sets or their interactions much. But overall, I was really pleased with Fire Emblem Engage, and it's one that I could see myself returning to more often than Fire Emblem Three Houses, which I still haven't finished all the routes, mostly because it just felt so laborious going through the early stages whenever you replay the game. Whereas in Engage, you could get right into the combat, into the thick of things, which I really appreciated. I think this game could be appreciated by newcomers and veterans of the franchise. Though those who've only been exposed to Fire Emblem Three Houses, you need to, I guess, go in knowing that it's going to be a little bit different than what you may have experienced in Three Houses. I've not actually purchased the DLC yet. I did hear that the last wave was rather disappointing, so I'm probably gonna wait to see if I could get it on sale before I try to get back into it. But let me know if you played the fourth wave DLC and what your thoughts were and whether or not it's worth getting. And then another game that I played rather early in the year was YuruKill, the Culmination Games. So this is a visual novel mystery game with some escape room elements mixed with some shoot 'em up mechanics. So it's a very interesting hybrid game that I actually chose as my most surprising game I played on the Switch for one of my collaboration videos I did on the channel. And I think that actually surprised me the most was how much I thoroughly enjoyed the game. I thought the visual novel aspects with all the different puzzles and escape room elements were really well done. There were a few times the puzzles were obviously catered to a Japanese audience that I had to look up, unfortunately. But that was only just a few instances, and I'm not one who feels bogged down by having to resort to looking at a walkthrough whenever I get stuck on a game. I personally don't see any shame in doing that, though I know there are some who are opposed. But the premise of this game is really interesting. You follow a number of different convicts who were accused of doing some sort of heinous crime, and they're paired with another individual who has the power to pardon them if they feel like they deserve it. And so you follow these various pairings as they make their way through these escape rooms in this large carnival theme park. And there's a good balance, I would say, of kind of weird, quirky humor with some darker elements, and it's a really interesting visual novel experience on that part. And then they're led onto these large ships where they then go into the shmuck gameplay and have to physically battle their way to prove why they should be pardoned or not. So the whole entire game I thought was really refreshing, and that I'm not really one who usually gravitates towards shmuck games, but I really enjoyed those elements of the game intertwined with the escape room visual novel elements. And I really appreciated the depth that went into a lot of the characters and the situations they found themselves in. There are also some Danganronpa elements during the trial sequences where the criminal had to select certain responses in order to persuade their innocence to the pardoner. Overall, I thought YuruKill was really interesting, pulling so many different elements from different genres together, creating this really unique experience that I think far too many people overlooked when it came out last year. And next is a game that I recently finished, and that is Witch on the Holy Night. And it's the first visual novel localization that Type Moon has done out in the West. This is a prequel to a very popular visual novel in Japan that I'm hoping also gets localized at some point. And it just recently celebrated its 11th anniversary. So it's been around for quite a long time. And as someone who isn't familiar with the other works from Type Moon, other than some of the anime adaptations from Fate Stay Night, I really enjoyed the story. So off the bat, I will say there are 0 interactive elements. So you're basically just reading a story, but it's beautiful. The animations that Type Moon is known for really stand out. And most visual novels tend to just have very 2D and flat panels that kind of cycle through as the stories unfold. And I really appreciate how much movement there was with the panning of the panels and some of the more animated elements that they threw in there, especially during the action sequences. I thought was really well done. And it's definitely the prettiest visual novel that I've so far experienced. As far as story goes, I won't reveal too much about what goes on because that's basically the entire experience, just to see how things slowly unfold. But the story mostly focuses on a high school student who just transferred to a new school in the city, having only lived in the country his whole life. And he ends up interacting with this girl who has a different sort of demeanor than he's used to, and she fascinates him. And eventually things happen where he finds more about her and her roommate who live together in the mansion and are witches. So I would say there are a lot of things that happen in the visual novel, but also a lot of things that don't happen in the visual novel. So it's a very kind of slow moving story where it mostly kind of revolves around the interactions between the 3 main characters and really getting to know them. With this being a prequel, I'm sure this is more of just kind of laying down the foundation of their sort of dynamics that play in the other part of the series. So with this being very slow paced, I did sort of tackle this in different spurts, kind of in between different games. And I think that's probably the best way to tackle this because of how kind of slow paced the story is. And it does get very rewarding, I would say, closer to the end, where a lot of things happen that are kind of unexpected. As far as the localization goes, I thought the translation was pretty good. There were a few noticeable typos that were unfortunate, to say the least, but that was only really obvious, I think, in a few different instances for me. The Japanese voice acting, the dialogue was excellent. Some of the narration was rather dry, which I don't know how true that is probably to the original work. It did seem like a little bit of a disconnect between how kind of fun the interactions were between the characters and just the dryness of the narration at times. But yeah, I would definitely recommend this to any visual novel fans out there who don't really mind the lack of interactive different routes and things like that, and are just looking for a really beautiful novel with some fantasy elements to take in. So I already made a full separate review video for Atelier Ryza 3 here, so I'm just going to talk about it briefly. And if you want a little bit more information about my thoughts regarding this game, I would check out that review. But I found Atelier Ryza 3 was a very satisfying conclusion to the Secret or Ryza trilogy. This was sort of the culmination of all the different things that Gust has learned over the years with the Atelier series. And this is definitely their most ambitious game yet, with some of the more open world-like exploration that they went into for this 3rd game. It was really delightful to visit some old places as well as see some new beautiful landscapes, and also just the interaction with so many different characters. It was great that they brought back everyone basically, and they introduced a few new ones, and I just thoroughly enjoyed everything about this game, from the battle sequences, the alchemy, exploring all the new islands and various places, and just interacting with this charming cast of characters again. It's very much well worth playing this if you're a fan of the Atelier games. Definitely start with the first game if you're interested in the Atelier games. These sequels kind of build off of the story elements and things that happened within the first, and the series is mostly a kind of coming to age tale. So you really want to have those core elements from the prior games to kind of see the character growth and progression all these characters make. It's just a more satisfying experience to play them chronologically, in my opinion. But you definitely don't want to miss out on the Atelier games if you're into JRPGs. This is more of a kind of slow-paced JRPG with emphasis more on the characters rather than story, but it's very rewarding in just how addictive the gameplay is, and getting to know all the characters just makes it a very fun time. Now, a game that I played in between some of my larger JRPGs that I've tackled so far this year is Transistor. So this is by Supergiant Games, who made Hades, and will have Hades 2 come out hopefully later this year or early next year. But this is a sci-fi action RPG with the art direction and atmosphere taking inspiration from a lot of Art Deco and the artist Gustav Klimt. As an indie development team, I think Supergiant Games just knocks it out of the park when it comes to building up very atmospheric games with really rich worlds and fun gameplay. So Transistor takes place in this futuristic city that is being overthrown by these futuristic mechanical-like creatures. And you have this trusty blade that speaks to you and helps you not only combat these machine-like creatures, and also helps guide you along and help your escape. And one of the interesting things when it comes to the combat is whenever you stumble across a body, you are given the memories of the person. You also obtain a certain skill set that you can equip and use that in your battle sequences. It does get increasingly difficult as you progress through your playthrough, and with all the different abilities you have, if you find yourself in a tricky situation where you're losing a lot of life, you can sacrifice these abilities for a short period of time. And they kind of go into this cooldown phase where you can't access them for a while. So you really have to be careful with not sacrificing too many of these abilities at a given time. Otherwise, you might find yourself in a situation you can't get out of. Another cool element that you could utilize is you could stop time and plan out the different attack sequences and skill sets you want to do. So there's a bit of a strategy element that does take some time to perfect, but can be very satisfying once you do figure it out. So Transistor is a beautiful game that I do highly recommend, especially for those who are into action RPGs. Also appreciate games with a really rich sense of atmosphere, both in how the visuals are driven as well as the soundtrack. It just really is a cool experience that I highly recommend. So I was playing a lot of Switch games this past quarter, so I decided to whip out my PS Vita and play Lost Dimension when I was asked to take part in a collaboration video on my friend's channel, The Gaming Shelf. In the video talking about hidden gem JRPGs. So this is a really interesting tactical RPG. When it comes to a lot of strategy RPGs, typically you grow your party over time as you progress throughout the story. Especially if characters end up dying, you usually have new characters to replenish them, like in the Fire Emblem series, for example. However, in Lost Dimension, you are given your full set of party members, and you have to choose on every floor who you want to eliminate because you think that they may be traitors. So this is a very interesting dynamic shift for me personally when it comes to strategy RPGs. And the combat is also very similar to Valkyria Chronicles in that you have some real-time strategy elements in the tactics gameplay. And what was also interesting about this game is that no two playthroughs are the same. The traitors in your party are actually randomized, so you can't look up strategy guide or anything to kind of get a sense of direction of who you need to eliminate on each floor in order to have certain things play out at the end. And each character brings a unique psychic ability to the table, so you have to kind of plan out who you bring with you on each run carefully and sort of balance the different abilities together in order to have a very harmonious kind of playthrough session. But yeah, I did enjoy the sense of mystery of who the traitors were throughout the game and interacting with the different party members. I would say that not every character was that deep. Some of them had interesting quirks. It was kind of fun to interact with, but as a whole, I wouldn't say that this is super character driven, unfortunately, and a little bit tropey at times, but still fun nevertheless. So this is a rather short JRPG, which is nice, but you do have to play it, I think, at least twice in order to get the true ending. The various connections you create between the characters does matter in order to get the true ending. I wouldn't say the true ending is super worthwhile getting, but at least the short playthrough sessions make it easy in order to access that if you want to. When it comes to the story, it is leaning towards the anime kind of tropes where you have these special forces units come together, and together they have to scale up this tower in order to take down this terrorist who's trying to end the world. And as you scale up the floor, you'll have various missions that you have to complete to take down the various enemies and learn a bit more about each character's quirks and personality, as well as try to figure out who the traitors are. So I had a lot of fun with Lost Dimension, and I did find it a refreshing take on the tactical RPG genre. While I do think it is a hidden gem, there are certainly flaws that make it far from perfect, but I think it's something that's still worth playing, especially if you're into this genre as well. And now I'll finally talk about the game I'm currently playing, and that is Trails to Azure. This was one of my most anticipated games for this year, so it was a little sad that I'm only now getting to it, but I got a review code for Ryza 3, so I wanted to wrap that up, as well as the other games that I was still in the middle of, so that I can commit to just focusing on Trails to Azure here. I'm not super far into it yet, but I'm loving my return to Crossfell and getting to play with the new party members on the SSS team, and it's just been a lot of fun, and I really can't wait to put more hours into this. My goal is to finish this before Tears of the Kingdom comes out, which I think I will be able to do. It's been rather difficult to put this down so far, so I can see myself easily finishing this within the next couple weeks. But just like whenever I bring up the Trails series, I do want to emphasize that this is very much a series that JRPG fans certainly should not miss and should not be intimidated by the very lengthy catalog of games that are available now. So I know we're at 12 games so far in the franchise, but don't be too intimidated by that number. Again, you can start anywhere in the series. Just be sure to start at the beginning of each arc. So if you're interested in the Crossfell duology, start with Trails from Zero before getting into Trails to Azure here, because they are basically one long game that was split into two. So you definitely don't want to miss out on the first half of this arc. But yeah, once I get further in this game and eventually complete it, I will definitely do a follow-up and share my thoughts about the conclusion to Trails to Azure here. And I'm really looking forward to Trails into Reverie, which is coming out this July, which I'll definitely be talking about on the channel as well. But yeah, those were all the games that I completed this first quarter of the year, plus Trails to Azure, which I just started. I'm hoping with the second quarter I will be playing a bit more of different consoles, since a lot of my focus has been on the Switch. So I'm hoping to break out my 3DS and finish up SMT4. I'm not sure totally when, but I want to make that happen the second quarter of this year, because I feel kind of bad leaving off at the point I did, because I was really enjoying it, and I don't want to keep that game on hold for too long, because then I would just feel the need to restart it, which I already racked up a lot of hours in there. I know how I mentioned last month how I want to get a PS5, but I've been a bit hesitant pulling the trigger just yet. With all the various rumors of a remodel coming out sometime this year, as well as with Tears of the Kingdom just around the corner, I don't know if I should buy the new hardware and just leave it sitting there while I focus so much time on Zelda. But I definitely want to get it to more PlayStation games this second quarter as well. And I definitely need it before I start Trails into Reverie, since I do plan on playing on the PS5. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed a little summary about all the games I've been playing and some of my impressions. Let me know if you've played any of these or what games you've been enjoying recently. And until my next video, bye guys.